Was Andrew the one that helped you get the podcast back up?
Yeah, he did get the podcast. He didn't help me. He did it.
Yeah. Don't you think you owe him a dinner for that?
Oh, no, he didn't.
Got him.
1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Apologetics Live. We're here to answer your questions and challenges about God and the Bible. Meet your hosts from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport, Dr. Anthony Silvestro, and Pastor Justin Pierce. We are live, Apologetics Live, here to answer your questions every Thursday night, 8 to 10 Eastern Time. You can go to apologeticslive.com to join in the discussion. If you have any questions about God and the Bible, as we say here, we can answer any question you have about God and the Bible. You don't believe us? Come on in and give us that challenge. Now, you heard that intro, which means that, well, Justin, what do you think that means, that intro?
Somebody owes you dinner.
Yeah, that must mean that Matt Slick is going to be with us tonight. Okay, we'll have to make Matt, and I'll have to let Matt explain that, but I think he'll get some boasting out of it now. Finally, after 9 years,
I was going to say he finally got it, didn't he?
Yeah. This is going to be so. Let me give how this show came about tonight. And this I should say, this is a ministry of Striving for Eternity. You can go to strivingforeternity.org, check out our resources. If you want to have one of us come out to your church and do a seminar, weekend seminar, we come to churches and we go to smaller churches that can't afford. So don't think that just because you're a small church, you can't have us come out. No, that's exactly where we want to go. We want to train up your people so that you can then take it from there and continue that training. Things like how to interpret the Bible, apologetics, evangelism, social justice is a big one these days. We've been doing more of those, I think, this past year and a half than any other. So you could go to strivingforeternity.org, check out there. So Matt Slick and I from carm.org, we were discussing, he was putting out a paper on carm about can Christians defend themselves? And we were having a long discussion. We've had these discussions in least recent months quite a bit. And we came up with the idea of having kind of a panel discussion here. And we have someone who I will admit that I was nervous having him in, but not as much as you are, Pastor Justin, because this is one of my old seminary professors, and you're now seminary professor. So you really have to be careful.
Well, he will be soon. He
will be soon. So you're going to have classes with him.
So what I've decided to do, just so you know, is just not even speak. I'm just
no. You're going to back and. Look, I know Dr. Burggraff, and he wants you speaking in class.
Well, that's good.
This is a name that many of you won't know, but he was my first choice in coming in as Dr. David Burggraff. He's with Shepherd Seminary, and I'm going to let him introduce more about himself. But I knew him back at Calvary Baptist Theological Seminary when he was the dean there. And so he was the first choice to have in. I was glad that we had him in. His dissertation was in the issue of just war. When I took a biblical ethics class with him, by the way, Justin, just so you know, any class with him is great, but you need to take a history class with him.
That sounds good.
Because history is one of those things where you have people that just don't know how to teach history well. They don't make it come alive. It's just dates and people's names, and it's boring. Yeah, and not so with him. In fact, I actually had him out at my church once we were doing a conference, and he weaves through his systematic theology background with his history background, so much so that what ends up happening is you end up getting a history of theology, because he goes in and explains, well, why did they argue this? Because this is what was going on. And so he gives that background so well. So I ended up saying, hey, can you do a history of theology? And I think he actually, I think a semester or two after that, there was a class in the seminary, history of theology, when I was like, oh, that was great. But he'll love having him. I will admit, at that conference that I just spoke of, I was nervous because he was taking notes frantically. And I thought, like, oh no, this is like back in seminary. He's taking notes. I'm going to get this paper at the end with all the corrections, everything I said wrong. And you know how you preach and you're thinking things like that? Yeah. Yep. Afterwards, I get done. I'm like, okay, what did I say wrong? He's like, nothing. I said, well, you were taking notes. He's like, yeah, I was taking notes. I'm like,
you see that one person and you're thinking, what did I do wrong? I know I said something wrong, just the way they're looking, and you almost lose focus, especially when it's somebody that you really respect and that you really want to understand what you're saying and appreciate it. So
Yeah. Well, let's bring in someone that's known by many here, Matt Slick from carm.org. I at least owe it to you to let you explain why I played that clip at the beginning, and then let you get a little gloating in, because you did get me.
Well, the reason is because you're an immature person who likes to rub victories in for years at a time. And so those of you who are listening who know the story, unfortunately how it goes is this jerk right here would repeatedly, I have to admit it, repeatedly outsmart me when it came to buying lunches and dinners. I was even out at his place once, got up 20 minutes early to go buy the dinner, and he'd already paid for it. I mean, just stuff like that. And then we got stories.
For 9 years. For 9 years. You've been trying.
But then on your 100th show of this show, I came on for 100.
I was here.
That's right. And I had sushi delivered to your house. And so that's the only way I could get you. I had to be out of the state and to surprise you and stuff like that. It finally works. And now I get a little bit of gloating on that. So.
All right. And I should say Justin, I forgot to say the other person I wanted on was Phil Johnson. He does have some old blogs that were very good on this subject. He said he couldn't make it tonight because he's got an elders meeting at Grace Community Church. I told him to get his priorities straight. I mean, but let me welcome on for the first time Dr. David Burggraff. It is a distinct privilege for me. I probably know you the best here, but it's a distinct privilege to have you on. Let me, for our audience, if you could just introduce yourself a bit and what you're up to lately, because this is the first time I think you and I have spoken to each other in probably, would you say, like 15, 20 years?
15, 20 years, perhaps, yeah. And I was amazed when we got on, you look old. So... But we go way back, though. I think I met you before you were in school, in seminary, and had just a really good time together. And even then, I met you at a conference in New Jersey. I think I was speaking at the church there, invite on a Saturday or something. There was a conference. And we sat together over lunch or something, and you just keep asking questions upon questions. But they were all good questions, and it's like, there's a thinker in the room, and I enjoyed that. It really did. And we had
about Andrew.
Well, I think it was Andrew. Yeah, it was Andrew. But that continued all the way through. So, no, thank you for the kind introduction. It was way, way over the top. But
well, I think we actually met probably in I'm going to say 90 or 91.
Yeah. Yeah. Something. Yeah. I had just come back from doctoral work about that time, and I think it was in Freehold or one of those areas or something. Yeah, and so
good memory.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I can visualize the church. It was a great opportunity, and we've been friends. And when Justin mentioned, hey, he knows Andrew, is like, oh my goodness,
no.
So here a month later we are, and so I want to thank Justin for that opportunity as well.
Well, absolutely. I'm really am thrilled. Personally, I'm just, I've been enjoying myself. The seminary, I pulled up the website, and I'm going to try to get over here for everybody to be able to go see it. The seminary is just, it's excellent. The pastors, the teachers, everyone just excellent. And I'm really enjoying myself.
Yeah, thank you. The seminary is about 18 years old, and actually one of the best kept secrets going on in it. The reason is it actually is a seminary in a church for the church. It was Colonial Baptist Church in Cary, North Carolina. Now it's in December, we changed the name to the Shepherd's Church, mainly because we're trying to do overseas work, and always having to explain colonialism in Africa or in the Middle East gets a little bit difficult. And so we chose the name the Shepherd's Church because we have a missions, we're sort of our own missions board with the Shepherds International. But the seminary, as I said, is here. This year we topped about 200 students that were primarily engaged in the Master of Divinity, Master of Arts, doctoral degrees. And we were just in a feature article in one of the magazines for ATS, the Association of Theological Seminaries, because of the 270 seminaries right now. 7 of them are growing by double digits in the last 5 years, where most of them are either staying stable or decreasing. And we grew 86% in the last 5 years. So that's been pretty exciting to be a part of that.
Wow.
Now, folks, give your background, because I know some folks might be interested even in what your undergraduate degrees were in, as well as your theological degrees.
Well, I did not become a born-again Christian, a Bible believer, until I was 22 years old. I had grown up in Minnesota, and my parents had been in a Catholic background, and so I was raised through parochial schools. After high school, I went into the service. That's when the Vietnam War was going strong, so I enlisted and served in the Army Reserves and active duty for 6 years. Got out and went to the University of Minnesota and graduated as a chemical engineer in biomedical nuclear engineering, and was going to go to medical school, but my wife and I both, my parents got saved, and that was almost by accident, and we became believers shortly thereafter. And then I ended up feeling called to the ministry, and so we started seminary in Minnesota. That's our home state, and did a Master of Divinity, went on to do a Master of Theology, pastored for 10 years, church plant, and then pastored, the church grew in Philadelphia area. Actually, it was Hershey, Pennsylvania area for 10 years. And then I pastored back in my home state of Minnesota for 3. I was invited to come back to the seminary and teach. During that time, I was working on a doctor of ministry degree, went on to do my PhD at Dallas Seminary, graduated in theological studies, and went to teach as a full-time professor and chairman of department at Calvary Baptist Seminary, and became the dean president, and was there for 17 years. And then for 3 years, I was asked to come aboard at Clearwater Christian College, did that. And while I was there, I was invited as a speaker here at the Colonial Baptist Church, Pastor Stephen Davey. And we struck up a wonderful friendship. He was starting or leading his church to start a seminary. They did. And he was bringing together professors, many of them who had been friends of mine for 30 years or so. Coming out of like the Master's Seminary, Dallas Seminary. As a seminary, we actually birthed a seminary that came out of the womb as an adult. And we brought professors who had over 200 to 300 years worth of combined experience teaching and 200 years worth of pastoral experience. And so on our first blush through, where most ATS seminaries go through a process to get accredited. Our first blush, we were fully accredited by ATS for the full first 7 years before we had to go through review. So the program has just taken off, and we're all about church planting. We set out in 2016 to do 20 churches by 2020, and we've done that. We're now trying to plant 25 more by 2025. So we plant churches, and we're doing revitalization all over the country right now of churches. And we have extensions in Wyoming, Texas, South Carolina, Florida now, Georgia. So we're launching, and we do sites in churches too that we call clusters. So there's some pretty exciting things. We're doing some innovative things in seminary training right now.
Well, that's neat. I don't know if you saw in the private chat, but Matt says he wants to do his Doctor of Ministry. So we'll have to hook you two up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we just launched it last year, having a wonderful program. We've got some firsts with ATS, and it's exciting. And we have a national conference now that's, and you'd know the speakers, many of them, they range from this year, Al Mohler, Erwin Lutzer to, the Costi Hins.
You got Alexander Struck, so you got to have a Jersey boy in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Owen Strand, Bruce Ware, yeah, you name it. So we have about 40 speakers.
So let's get into the topic tonight. And if you see on your screen, you can see it's shepherds360.org is the URL. I'll mention that just for those who are watching, who are listening on the podcast later. So this has been a big issue lately, is the whole question of, can Christians defend themselves? How far can they go? What justifies, what can we do as far as self-defense? And then the issue of just war theory. Now you, Dr. Burggraff, that was your dissertation. And I've sat in class with you going through this. And just for the audience to understand, in ethics classes, you were going through explaining just war theory. And you're saying, you kept going, well, I can't go into more detail. I can't go into more detail. And my mind was being blown with the different things. I'm like, I've never even thought of that. I never thought of that. There was so much to it. And I know when Matt and I were talking, he was like, I really want to get someone that knows this stuff well. There's someone we can ask questions to and things like that. So we want to spend, and I know we got some people backstage, we want to spend the first part of the hour or so just first giving you an opportunity to kind of open up what just war theory is for a while, explaining it, the whole idea of self-defense, and then kind of just allow us to pepper you with questions, essentially, kind of like a classroom. So if you could give us an overview, what is just war theory? What do we see as biblical principles when it comes to self-defense?
Sure. Thank you. I think what you have to do in that is perhaps for a moment talk just war theory and keep it on a national level where a nation can defend itself, and then bring it back into individual self-defense. And so if you can break it into two categories, that might help you quite a bit. I got interested real quickly, just a little bit in this, because I was doing my doctoral work in the area of theology. And probably one of the most important figures in what we would call the Western Church in understanding theology was Augustine. So I was doing my work in the area of patristics, and it was interesting because as I was studying the concept of, or dealing with Augustine, I wanted to deal with how theologians do theology. And so during that doctoral work, I was doing a lot of work on that topic, the theological methodology, beginning with the Bible, its hermeneutics, its interpretation, and then how do we make these profound statements that we do as theologians and as pastors, and people go, how'd you get that? And so I wanted to figure out how we do that. And Augustine is the ideal model because he has done more research and writing than and there are more libraries dedicated to him next to the Lord of any other man who's lived. And so I was studying him, but something in the process is he actually was the first Christian to write on a theory of war. And when you study it, he actually didn't. He laid out the principles that deal with, can a Christian go to war? Prior to him, there was a lot of ambivalence about Christians being involved even in the military. And is it proper for a Christian to be in the military? And can Christians kill? Especially when Jesus said, in the Sermon on the Mount, turn your cheek, which is probably one of the most misunderstood passages of Scripture to begin with when it comes to this whole discussion of war and killing. What just war theory is within the idea of Christianity. Is there a way to discern whether a war is actually proper Is it something, can Christians go to war? Is war then something that God would, as it were, permit? And then, so if that is possible, then what would be the criteria for which then to say, okay, these criteria are met, therefore we can engage in a war. We can commit ourselves and our troops, our sons and our daughters now into this war, and as they sacrifice for their nation. Is it even proper, or is it something we're going to have to answer to God for because we stumbled into it? Once we engage in a war and we've met those criteria, then how do we conduct war? So the two categories of just war, in the terms JWT, just war theory, mean the justification for going to war and the justification for killing in war. And then how do we wage the war? And so there are several criteria for then what's called jus in bello, and that is the justice for going to war, and then jus ad bellum, excuse me, and then jus in bello is the idea of justice in war, how we should act. So those are two categories. We can go into those deeper. We can talk about the criteria, but it's important. And the United States of America has used just war theory as its guiding principles. Most Christians down through history have, especially once we hit the Reformation thereafter. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and great theologians thereafter and pastors after that, and then for instance, in the great divines who will use then confessions and others throughout the church, and canonists and jurists. And today in our country, you say in the United States, senators, congressmen, any from Christian backgrounds are going to appeal to just war theory. And Lincoln did, others did. When we went to war right after 9/11, coming up on its 20th anniversary, when we went into Afghanistan then, or the Middle East, and then as we went to war again with Iraq, every time on the floor of Congress, they're weighing out the principles, and they're talking in the categories of just war theory. And actually then it was Augustine picking up some early seed thoughts from Aristotle already on how the Greeks, then the Romans, used criteria for going to war. Is this something we should engage in? Is it worth it? Augustine then came on the scene because he was asked by Count General Boniface. He was writing in response to attacks against Christians that your God of the Old Testament is a killing God versus Jesus, so there's two gods. And so he wrote to Faustus, a Manichaean, and he spelled out then the principles for war, and he laid then the groundwork, the thinking, the theology that later got structured into what we call just war theory. And so that's how we got to what has become then part of the Christian church the last 1,500 years.
So could you explain what just war theory is? And then, let's dig into a little bit of how, in our day and age, this is becoming popular, right? There's a lot of people, specifically, like you look in Canada, the government is, arresting pastors, freeing people that are rapists and murderers, arresting pastors, and then chaining up their churches so that they can't go in. And that really became a big topic here on this show. Even we had lots of discussion on what should the church do? Should we cut the fence down and go in anyway? Do we do as James Coates did by just going off site in places like that? So could you explain just war theory, then explain, what your view is on how we should handle things with our own country? Yeah,
I think, to your intro right there, Andrew, what's really important is there's a host of questions that you're raising there, and it raises the question, well, a couple of things, and if I can back up a little in just war theory and just sort of lay out the map, and then we'll start moving some things around on it, or if we could, let's lay out the chessboard and then start putting the pieces in. There really are three, and I heard it mentioned already here. There are three categories that people find themselves in when we get down to the idea of what do we do in our society. One is the area of activism, which an activist holds that I'll support my government and whatever they say, because obviously they know what's going on, and here I am. I'm not one who has access to the information they do, and they have all these great organizations we have, whether it's our CIA, FBI, whoever. So they have the channels then of intelligence and means to gain then from the intelligence community. I don't, therefore I have to completely trust them. If they say we need to go to war, then my job is just to stand up and salute and say, yes, sir, and obey it in order to conduct the mission as they do that. And so we just acquiesce to government. That whole thing is called, for lack of a better term, it's known as activism. There are, of course, objections to that, because no matter what country you're in, then if you believe that, you believe your government's always right. And so you got two opposing forces on who's right and who's doing the right thing. And then you just become a nationalist. In that sense, there's no control, because even if you're then in an evil government, you fall in line with evil leaders. Just then on the other side, you've got pacifists who believe all wars are wrong and we should not be involved. And you have categories there of resistance, etc., conscientious objection, and which is a whole nother category. Somewhere in there, in the middle, you have to step aside and say, okay, let's bring some rational, moral, virtuous thinking to this, the most devastating thing that humanity can do. And that is, since the fall of man and thereafter, we've been killing each other. And down through history, we've become pretty good at it. In the 20th century, saw it on a scale that became known as the Great War and the World War. I mean, you start looking at World War I, and 39 million people were killed, 30 million of those being civilians. Then we get to World War II, only 20 some years later, and 51 million people are killed, and 34 million of those are civilians, and that doesn't even include the genocides. And since World War II, there's been over 150 wars, with over 17 to 20 million civilians killed. So it just gets out of hand as it goes on. So it was then through, like Augusta and others, we need to somehow bring some sanity to what we're doing, or we'll just follow bad leadership. We need to discuss this. And so with that in mind, just war theory then is the concept. As I said, there's two categories to it. Let's talk first of all, jus ad bellum, which is the idea, the justification for going to war. Now, this is going to come up in self-defense too, because the justification even for defending yourself. But let's talk about defending a nation or defending another nation, a third party that you see as being bullied, picked on, or is going to lose its national sovereignty. Can you come to their aid? So with that in mind, there's there's about 5 criteria, and if you wanted to, you could look at, for instance, in the ESV. One of the handiest is to take the ESV study Bible, go to the back under ethics, look up war, and you'll see about 8 criteria there for just war theory as they've spelled it out there. But let me give you real quickly the criteria that are most common for when can you go to war. Number 1, there has to be a just cause. In other words, a just cause may be, as I said, to intervene for an innocent third party, third country, or to punish an evil aggressor, to stop evil, or to defend your own nation from either aggression or overthrow. So it's a just cause. And the idea then, with that in mind, is going then for a just cause. If you want to, I could give you scripture verses, but the easiest one is just Revelation 19:11. When the Son of Man comes back, when Jesus comes at the second coming, we see him return, and he's coming to wage war. And so, but there's a just cause. Number two then is, in going to war, is right authority. With that in mind, has a war been declared by proper authorities? Just wars are not private revolutions. A just war is not someone who says, there are several of us in the state of Michigan, Oregon, etc., and we're going to go on a mass shooting of government officials because we feel they're evil. No, right authority in our country, it's the U.S. Congress has to wage war. Okay, and so with that in mind, there's vigorous debate on whether or not we should commit forces to this war, the money, the resources, etc., and send our sons and daughters into battle for us. So it has to be, one, a just cause. Number two, right authority. Number three, just intention, or the idea would be, what are we going to war for? And sometimes they call this comparative justice or right intention. And so the purpose of going to war then is to protect justice and righteousness, with the idea, a realizable goal of peace. And ultimately, it's not to, their just war does not permit you to go in with the idea of conquest, of taking over land. We will expand, and we can go imperialistically, and we can conquer, and we will expand then our country. In other words, we'll take over the sovereignty of another for our benefit. That's not at all. It's not territorial conquest. It's not even revenge. As much as back in when after 9/11, well, let's just turn that whole country, into a parking lot. You can't do that, a dirt parking lot at that. You can't go in and just decide we're going to nuke a nation, because look what they did to 3,000 of our people in the trade centers. Actually, 2,977 of them died. So if we go in, with that in mind, you can't just, it's got to be a goal of peace. Okay. And then the fourth criteria is proportionality. And that idea then is, are the potential gains worth the possible costs and sacrifices of human lives, finances, etc.? And so you're not going to go for a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic went in, lost all of his navy, but he won the war, in ancient Greece. And so the idea is, when you're left with nothing, what was that about? So proportionality, you weigh the costs, you weigh the benefits. And so this just cause, right authority, right intention, proportionality, and then lastly, war is a last resort. And with that in mind, you use every negotiable, and we do that, nonviolent means of persuasion to attempt, whether it's blockades, whatever it is, and you give it a reasonable amount of time. And you're going with the right spirit. It can't be vengeance, can't be hatred. It has to be with the idea of gaining peace and protection, justice, etc. So those are the criteria for going to war in a just war category. Okay. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And you can see there, Justin was Chris was quickly taking notes here, and he's put them all out there.
I'm impressed. That's
so we have students in the audience here being good students.
I love it.
Expecting Justin to do that, but he just found
well,
it.
actually, I was pulling it up from the legal uslegal.com. It actually lays out the same exact argument that you're making. What I found amazing about the argument and about the discussion is both the legal argument from uslegal.com And what you just said is based on a Christian worldview.
Yes,
It cannot be based on an atheistic, anti-God worldview, because there is no reason for you to be just in a worldview of chaos. There's no reason for you to be just in a worldview that says I should dominate based on my ability to come and take control. The survival of the fittest does not allow for a just war theory. So this has to be founded upon a Christian worldview.
And Justin, you raised some really good questions. There's the second part of this then that is known as we talk about it, is jus in bellum. And there's actually two criteria that can break down into a couple of other ones. But one is, once you engage in a war, the criteria when talking about jus in bello, justice in battle, the two major criteria, and I know others will say, well, there's actually four, but let me just explain the two, and they make sense then how you get to four. One is simply the word proportionality.
Yep. In
other words, proportionality in the use of force, okay? The idea then is you go in proportionate then to the task or the mission at hand. With that in mind, then in World War II, we would do that when we went to war with Japan, for instance. We didn't just bomb every island. We just went to the key strategic ones, and that strategy was wither on the vine. In other words, why kill unnecessarily? It's just going to burn out. So there's proportionality. In other words, no greater destruction should be caused than the need to win the war. And that would be Deuteronomy 20:10-12, if you looked at some passages there. The other part is the most important part, and sometimes it's known as non-combat immunity, or the idea of discrimination between combatants and non-combatants. Okay? So proportionality and non-combatant immunity, and that is, wars are to be waged by soldiers in as much then as it is feasible. You should, as the war then is pursued, adequate care must be taken to prevent harming non-combatants as much as possible, and trying to keep from destroying the land of those people. Because many of the people in many of those nations, Afghanistan, for instance, many of the nearly 30 million people of Afghanistan are not in alignment at all with radical Islamists, okay, with the Taliban, Al Qaeda, etc. Those people themselves are finding themselves suffering. All you have to do is even watch some of the television reports coming out right now, and you see in the streets of the city the people protesting, only then to hear the gunshots going off, and then they scream and they break up because the Taliban break them up. But you still want to protect those people. That's why you don't turn it into a parking lot. With that in mind. So the idea then is the avoidance of evil, and you go into battle with good faith. In other words, you want to make peace with that nation, so eventually that nation can be brought into living in harmony with the rest of the world, if that could be achieved. So those are the principles for in battle, thinking then proportionality, combatant immunity. And in the military, you often hear, we were doing Middle East struggles and whatnot. Why didn't we just keep on going and wipe out the government, do everything, just take over the nation? And that was debated in our Congress. They were given, here's the overall mission. We set out to do this. And, after 9/11, Bush went to Congress, and President Bush then said, here's the mission. He took a lot of heat afterwards, George W. Bush, for why didn't you keep going further? And it's well, that was beyond the mission. And then we were going beyond then proportionality. So there, we take this pretty literal as a nation. Now, the whole thing and I have, like, you can go on the internet right now. I have a library full of books, though, that by many people is just war theory even feasible in a nuclear age? Number war, can just war theory, the hottest debate going on today is, can just war theory be practiced in an age of terrorism? Because the word terrorism itself tells you what terrorism is about. It isn't about combatants fighting combatants.
Yep.
What it is, it's based on striking terror into the populace. Okay, you win by fear. You frighten people into submission. And the result of that then, if it violates everything about just war theory. But should we, if we deal with terrorism, can we practice just war theory principles? And I believe we can. Then there's the whole issue: can we use nuclear weapons? And does that fit the criteria of just war theory? I think on the large scale, probably not. However, I think there can be tactical nuclear weapons rather than some of the large scale nuclear weapons. But just war theory, we went from having Russia and the United States. I think at one point the United States had just under or just over 30,000 nuclear weapons. Russia had around 29,000. 29,000. Right now, we have about 46 since 2016. I think we have about 4,600. Russia has about 4,500, and there are right now 9 nations that have nuclear weapons, and so that raises a whole nother discussion. But okay,
Absolutely.
Well, let me do this before we bring Matt in and start getting some questions. I think this is going to be the best time for me to give a word from our sponsors, because we may not get you a good chance other times. So this show is hosted or supported by MyPillow. If you guys want to go and you guys know that I say this all the time, that I absolutely love MyPillow. And if you could go to 1-800-873-0176, that's the 800 number they gave to us, 800-873-0176, or go to mypillow.com, use promo code SFE. I recently got their towels, and I have been very satisfied with them. I've loved the pillows for years. Recently got the towels and found them to be extremely absorbent, which I was surprised at, and very lightweight as well compared to most towels that are absorbent. Really good stuff, built here in the United States, which is nice. They run specials. They have the promos that they have there, and you can only get those with a promo code. So if you use the promo code SFE, not only are you getting products made here in the United States, good products, but you're also going to be supporting Striving for Eternity and putting on this show. So we thank them. And with that, I'm going to bring everyone back in. So,
All right.
So you had, and I'm going to put this up for folks, 2 articles that you have. One is at carm.org. And if you just go to carm.org and search Should a Christian Go to War? That's an article, I think it was back in 2008 that you wrote that one. But the article that you and I were recently discussing, and you've been going back and forth quite a bit on, is this other one. And go to carm.org and just do a search on, do Christians have the right of physical self-defense? It's an article that was put out sometime last month. You put that out. And very lengthy, Old and New Testament arguments. So real quick, Matt, let me give you a chance do you want to respond with, because you haven't come on to the show since you've written that argument. Do you want to go into any detail what your views were with that? And,
Sure.
And then what we could do is engage with Dr. Burggraff on some questions.
Sure. The reason I wrote it is because we have, as CARM, the intergalactic empire that CARM is, we have some missionaries in Africa. Well, you got to, I tell people this is the world, this is the intergalactic headquarters right here, and they're impressed. We have missionaries in Africa, Malawi. We have them in Nigeria. Nigeria's been under a lot of persecution. So what they're doing is they're taking CARM articles of different topics. They've been going around for months and months, years apparently, and because my articles are quick, I like to say quick and slick, they're succinct, you get right to the point, and having Bible studies and teaching pastors. And then this issue came up of, can we defend ourselves? Because Christians are being murdered there. And so I said, okay, let me do some research. And so I started researching it even more. And I knew that the article would be used by many people in Africa to justify whatever the article justifies. So I take it very, very seriously, very carefully. So long story short, I have a summary of a summary. We pray for and love our persecutors. We seek peace with them. We have the right of verbal self-defense. We have the right of legal self-defense. We have the right to flee persecution. And we also have the right, but not the obligation, but the right of physical force, if necessary, in order to protect ourselves and or others. And the analogy I kind of use is you're at your house. And because this is not a national thing, this is personal. What do you do? Because like in Nigeria, the nation is not protecting the Christians. I don't call them radical Muslims. They are true Muslims. They go in and kill. That's what true Islam teaches out of the Hadith, out of the Quran. So the radical ones are the ones who are peaceful, because the Quran teaches in Surah 9, teaches killing, going out and seeking people, destroying, taking over the world, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, so what do? Can they use a knife to defend themselves, a gun to defend themselves? Can they, different levels of questions. And this is why I had to write that and answer different kinds of questions. And hopefully I did a good job. So that's the basic. We can go in particulars, conclusions and stuff. I went into the Old Testament. I went into where Jesus says by a sword. Jesus drove the people out of the temple. He made a weapon to do that, to defend God's honor. And then what kind of weapons are okay for Christians? What do you do when a government fails to protect? Because one of the obligations of a government is to protect its citizens. So what if it fails to do that? Then how far do we go? These are not easy topics. You don't just solve them in one paragraph. You just don't do that. But you can give general principles, and that's what I did there. And then, issues of aggression against an impending attack. So I use an analogy. And I have a friend who's retired Border Patrol, and so he knows a lot about the laws, what you can and can't do. And we had a good discussion. He gave me some good insights, and I agree with what he was saying. So if you're in your home and someone's outside of your home yelling on the sidewalk that they're going to come into your home and they're going to kill you, and I have an AK-47, you have your weapon, and so you can't shoot him. You're just threatening. You're just saying stuff. What if he has a gun and it's pointed down at the ground and he's yelling he's going to kill you? You still can't shoot. What if he raises the weapon and points it at your house and is going to fire? Can you shoot him then? The answer is yes, because it's an imminent threat where it's going to happen, and you have that right then of self-defense. Well, then the question then becomes, what do you do if you see him walking across the street with a gun pointed at you, coming at you? Can you defend your house there by preemptively striking? Now that's not so easy to answer. What do you do if there's 50 people coming down a road and they're coming at you to destroy you, and you can, in a narrow pass, take them out? Do you take them out? Or do you flee? These are all kinds of variables and questions, and these are the kinds of questions that the people, the average Christian in Nigeria, in Africa, and some parts of the other parts of the world are facing. What can they do? What can they not do? And those are the kind of questions. Maybe we could talk about some particulars. I don't know, but I came up with some conclusions, and I don't know if my conclusions are all right, but I did the best I could to answer them according to Scripture. And I don't claim I got it perfect, but I certainly tried to make it biblical.
Well, let's try to go through some of those right here and see if what we can come up with. So, this is a point where I really would like to have where we can kind of just do kind of panel discussion. I know we have people in the background, but just asking Dave, ask you some questions on some of this stuff. Matt, I know you've had a bunch of questions. You just raised some, so let me just let the two of you. I'm gonna actually just let the two of you kind of engage a bit, and I'm gonna put Justin and I in the background, and just Matt, you guys go back and forth a bit.
Sure. Well, let me just jump in. If I come home, and we can just use this and keep going, but if I come home and someone is in the process of attacking my wife, she's across the room, I can't reach her before he's going to kill her, and I have my gun on me, boom, and I shoot him, that's just because it's protecting of someone else, right?
Correct. It is. Yeah.
All right.
Yep. And a couple of things I concur with as you're talking, and I haven't had an opportunity to read your article, but you're exactly right. And an Old Testament passage, and I know there's things in the kingdom, etc. Old Testament kingdom. However, there are principles laid out there. Exodus 22, 1-3. You probably use that in your argument of, and that talks about, and right after, in Exodus 20, God gave to the nation of Israel the 10 commandments. Commandment number 6, thou shalt not murder. Okay. And the term, the word that's used there in Hebrew for murder is reitzach. And it has the idea then of the unlawful taking of another person's life. An unlawful, we were just talking about some of that. And that's how it ends up, murder. Never is reitzah ever used for in war. That Hebrew word is never used in war or defending. And so a lot of people say, well, the Bible says thou shalt not kill. Wait a minute, it says thou shalt not murder, okay? And there is justifiable killing, and you hit exactly on that, even to the point where you said the use of weapons. Luke 22, there's 36-38, where he's talking about sell what you have. If you don't have, buy the sword, with the intention of what? Buy two if you can. And Jesus' apostles apparently carried swords with them. We know that Peter had one, and somebody was short of an ear for a little while, so they can. And the use of weapons to stop someone, like you said in that case, breaking into the home, that is exactly the biblical illustration in Exodus 22. And that idea that they're breaking into your home. The interesting thing, Matt, is this. It says if they're breaking into your home at night and you kill them, nothing will be, however, during the daytime. And that's at that point, then the idea is you can stop them before harm. But if they have, in other words, biblically, we also see in Proverbs where if there's somebody harming somebody else, you have to come biblically to that person's aid and defend and even take their life if necessary. Lost a microphone there.
I put myself on mute. Sorry. I discovered, just off what you're saying, I discovered that there's more scriptures that talk about defending others than yourself.
Yep.
That's what I discovered. And so you have more of an obligation to step in to help others.
No, yeah. And John Piper's put out an excellent article, if you remember that one, where it said, he would not take somebody else's life. And Augustine felt that way too. I agree with much of what John Piper said. I know Wayne Grudem, in his article, in his politics book on ethics, as in his Christian ethics as well as his politics, he says, I agree with John Piper to a degree. However, no, he says, I think he didn't go, complete that. You need to defend. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone came in, and may it never happen. I don't ever want it to happen, ever. But because of what I do for a living, I have to carry a gun. Because I've had death threats. I've been swatted, followed in cars. Satanists say they're going to kill us. All kinds of stuff. But if I came home, and I've thought this through, I've done martial arts, so I can get to a person and stop them. That's different. But if I can't get to that person in time or whatever is necessary, and I had to shoot in my mind here, sitting here, yeah, I would. Would I really win? You never know what you're going to do until you're there.
Right.
But I think it's perfectly defensible.
Yes,
Now,
it is. Biblically, it is.
Yes. Now let's say I come home, I'm driving in the driveway, I hear screams coming out of a neighbor's house, and the door's open, and I see a woman running out, and she's bloodied, and she trips and falls, and this guy has got a bat over her, and I'm out of the car by then, and I stop, and he hits her once, and he's going again, boom, I got to shoot him. Okay, that's justifiable because it's an imminent threat of possible physical death, and you've warned and you stop the threat. That's proportional because it's a death threat there. So there you go. All right.
Correct.
Now, what if you got the gun and you're holding it, and the guy looks at you, he stops beating his wife, and he comes at you? Then what do you do? If you can flee, you flee. But if you can't flee within reason, and there's another thing, your wife is sitting there with you, you can't flee because you'll endanger her. So you tell him to stop. He doesn't, all these variables. Okay, well, what do you do as a Christian in Nigeria, for example? Now we've got the Muslims, and anyway, Islam is a world-class satanic evil religion. And I've debated it many times. I studied it. In fact, on 9/11, I'll be on ABN Sat TV hosting on Islam with some speakers. It's going to be fun. Anyway, so in that country, they are not allowed to have weapons.
Right.
They're not allowed to have guns. And so, but the Muslims, as an example, have guns, and they come in. Now, here's a question. Can you then go find guns anyway to have a proportional defense? And my answer is yes, personally, because Jesus says, Luke 22:36, buy a sword, which is a weapon it's a lethal weapon at that time. And because the government's failing to do its job, its obligation, you then have to take care of your own as well as others. So what do you think of that?
Well, your problem is going to be the government is never going to in a Muslim country like that will probably still find reason. And that's the problem you have with advising the Christians there. They're in a lose-lose situation.
Right, they are.
And that is one of the great injustices that we see going on in our world right now, because because the government in many of those countries themselves are in violation of Romans 13. The government is to protect its citizenry. And verses 1-4, God mandates, and God even allows those governments the use of the sword, meaning the weaponry, to defend its citizens. They have let down the protection of their citizenry. And when the citizens then take it upon themselves, because of the government's failure to even think rationally as a government, and mainly because of their religious ideologies as well that have become perverted on the part of the governmental leaders, the people are in some very, very precarious situations, even if they defend themselves. And
here's another factor. Because this is never black and white.
No.
In Islam, I've talked to many people raised in Muslim countries, and they tell me across the board that Muslims respect force, and they believe that if you seek a truce with them, and I could give you the history and why what happened, but it doesn't matter. If you seek a truce with them, it's because you're weak, and so it emboldens them to go attack.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the Islamic culture, and it actually is. It's what's taught in Islam.
Yeah.
Now, if you say, well, let's just make peace with them, by knowing that, now you're encouraging them unintentionally to attack you. So the way to defend yourself and stop is to get weapons and be aggressive to the point of you need to stop. It sounds weird, but in that culture, that situation, it seems to make sense.
Well, the whole idea of deterrent there, And that is one of the reasons, carrying the weapon, the rifle, the AK-47 in front, et cetera, knowing that at any time I will use it if I have to. I'm not advocating it here. I'm saying in those countries that, the problem you're dealing with the Christians in Nigeria, the tragedy that they're facing is actually two things. One, we are told by Christ we will face persecution.
Yep.
Okay, so and we almost should expect that we may die unjustly for persecution. At the same time, you've got evil bullying, for lack of a better term, or others who want to take their life, which demands self-defense. So they're as Christians, they have to debate the two. Is this persecution or is this just hatred? Do you know what I mean? Of my nation and my my nations, you know what I mean? And so
that brings up another issue. We Christians are allowed to defend, but we're not allowed to take vengeance.
Exactly.
Can't take vengeance.
Yeah. And so
Right.
and so if this has happened to me because of my testimony for Christ, as distinguished, it's take my family or whatever. So, there's that conundrum that the modern world lives in. Peter in 2 Peter 2:12, where he talks about unbelievers will act like wild animals. And he says that, and creatures, they act in instinct. And he tells them then that it is morally right then to defend yourself. Just the way David defended himself from an animal when he was attacked by it, he killed it. Peter's making an analogy that you can defend yourself, or it carries, there's a syllogism, A equals B, B equals C, A equals C. But it's a really tough line for these folks, and
Yeah, it is.
It is, and if they practice the biblical principles, they're still going to find themselves out in the at odds with the government there.
Yeah, well, that brings up another issue, because I've written an article a while back on January 15th, the Christian's duty to obey and disobey government.
Yes. Yep.
There's actually an obligation to disobey.
Yep.
We don't disobey because we don't like them. Now, here's a question. Okay, so let's bring this up, because I don't know about you, how you are about the COVID. I'm doing extensive research on COVID vaccines and everything. I'm doing a lot of research. It's coming up on the radio show, et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, now my opinion is, from what I've seen of it, what I've studied, I don't trust the vaccine. This is my opinion. And if someone's had it, I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying, this is just me. I don't trust it, and I don't want to take it. Now, what if the government says, we want you, mandating, as Biden is now doing it today, he's mandating that we take it. Now, as they're forcing essentially an experimental drug on us. Now, does this fall under the right of self-defense to say no? How about that?
When they mandate it, they can, like he said, as you mentioned today, he said, I have the right as the president of the United States to say, if you are involved in a government and you work for the government in some type of underneath the executive branch, I can tell you what you have to do. I think before I would react offensively in that sense of violently retaliate, the idea would be you may have to, by holding to a view, I am not going to listen to you. Biblically, you would face the consequences, like in Acts 5:29, et cetera, knowing that, hey, if I do this, I'm gonna lose my job if I work for the government. Do you know what I mean?
Right. What do you do?
Well,
anyway.
I think one of the things that would be brilliant to do, I mean, because part of this in this point is, at least in America, is we do have certain laws that allow us a right to do certain things, like a lawsuit. Right. I mean, I think it'd be amazing to see 80 million people in a class action lawsuit against Biden. but we have this recourse. Recently, I mentioned this on my Rap Report podcast, was the fact that you look at what John MacArthur did at Grace Community Church. When he realized they felt that the church was being targeted, they didn't rebel outwardly. They said, okay, there are means that are legal. This is still fitting within Romans 13. I actually would argue it was the government that was breaking the law, and therefore they had an obligation to go to court and bring this up in court and say, we're challenging this. And I think that's right now, I would say that would be the route to go with your question, Matt.
Right. Well, I have in my list, I said earlier, it's pray for the persecutors. And number 2, seek peace with them. 3, verbal defense. 4, legal self-defense. 5, flee if you have to. And then 6, use physical force if you have to after that.
Well, one thing you got to notice too is that when you had what was going on in Canada, the first reaction that you saw so many people saying was, "Let's go bust everything down. Let's go fight. Let's go to war." And as Andrew and I pointed out multiple times, that's not our first reaction. In fact, as you saw the just war theory, that's the last resort. The physical fighting is the last resort based on those criterion. What we want to do is use the legal means that are afforded to us. And as Dave just said, when we decide to stand up as Peter did and say, you do what you got to do, but I'm going to do this for the glory of God.
Right.
You also take the consequence, whatever the consequence is. But we're stepping from the area of personal defense against bad people to defense against a governmental force. And those things play a little differently. So we have to recognize that as well.
Okay, so what about this? I tell people, Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, powers and principalities. Okay, assume this and then put it in place, which explains why the zombie-crats are trying to develop a thugocracy. And I can get that. And one of the things that they want to do is
I love the terms you come up with, Matt. They just crack me up.
It's very Pauline.
Yeah, it sounded like it sounded poetic.
That when my spiritual Tourette's hasn't kicked in right now, so I'm trying to be even politer. I want to, imprecations. It's difficult to pray for the president and Biden and Pelosi and AOC and Harris and half of the other
wonderful people. Yes, lovely people.
Oh yeah. I say, Lord, if they're not elected, get them, imprecatorily. At any rate, I believe there's a place to stand up and resist. Anyway, that's another topic. Okay. Now I totally forgot what I was going to say. It was really important. It was going to be great. And it's gone, though. What was I talking about?
Well, we were discussing, you were originally starting with the vaccines. And so let me take with what you said. So let me take what Matt started with and go a little further. So say it's not just losing your jobs. They're coming house to house as actually they are doing in some areas.
They want to do.
No, not that they want to. In New Jersey, they are going house to house and seeing who is vaccinated. They came by once. One of the people in our church came by once just to see, have you been vaccinated? Do you need a vaccine? We're coming to those who might be homebound. The second time they were coming through to find out who was vaccinated or not. So now if they come to the house and they start demanding, we are going to vaccinate you. They're there with the police. They're going to hold you down and vaccinate you.
Self-defense.
Then is there an opportunity for self-defense or not?
Yes. I believe so. I would use what I could to physically stop them until they had to absolutely force me.
I believe we won't. Honestly, this may be a dress rehearsal for something more significant in the next decade. But I don't think this particular virus is going to come to that point. But this is going to start setting up precedents and laws, because what's happening right now, Andrew, to your point, this is going to end up in court as violation of people's rights.
Exactly.
And so the first government employees that start getting fired are going to go and bring lawsuits.
That's right.
And so this is gonna get there. Out of this are going to come laws that next time are going to be carried further. and they'll and so
They'll keep pushing.
it won't be about the 80 million this time, but something significant is going to come.
Yeah, we could talk off air. There's something called immunity debt, and I've discovered this researching. So you have a certain amount of germs that the population gets exposed to in a year, and the more you isolate and mask, the less germs you have, the less immunity strength you develop, so that after a few years, when something comes in that really wouldn't have been a big deal, now it wipes everybody out, just shuts down. Then they shut down the economy, and they go even further to demand. And this is the cycle that's going to happen.
Right.
Now, personally, because of this, I believe, I remember Ephesians 6:12. I believe ultimately that this is a demonic movement to suppress the gospel. Ultimately. That's what I believe. And so I believe that we Christians have the obligation to strongly resist the government, strongly resist these mandates, to not riot, but to petition, to gather, to protest, to do so. I think we should all mail a mask to the White House, every Christian in the country, with a note, "Leave me alone," or "My body, my choice," and mail it to them. And because pre-tribulation rapturism, you get out of everything early, you get to go away. The churches aren't teaching, the pastors aren't teaching. I know you guys do, but the pastors aren't teaching what they need to be taught. That Christians are becoming wussified and apathetic, and they're not being equipped for the work of ministry. They're being given baby talks and diaperinian theology. It's another slickism. You can go to my Slicktionary on Carm. Slicktionary, you have that. I got a new one today. Ranticostical. It's someone, we had someone on the radio today who said he wanted to debate me on the radio he would debate me on the Trinity. And I said, well, what is it? Defend it. He goes, I don't know, but it's wrong. And I started howling. I was laughing. And so he's a ranticostal. He just rants against something he doesn't even know what he's talking about. So anyway, I believe we Christians need to stand up. And if we don't, we're going to lose our rights. We're going to lose the ability to preach that saving gospel. Ultimately, this is a spiritual battle. We need to think about it that way. That diaperinianism. That's right, Chris. And Chris, I owe him a big thanks. He saved my rear a few years ago.
Okay.
I have lost a lot of faith in
me.
No, my faith is growing in you with new words like ranticostal, etc. I need you as my thesaurus. Okay.
Oh yeah, well I'm sesquipedalian, so it'd be great.
No, my faith in large scale Christianity coming together and doing something significant has really sort of hit the skids when we wussed out on abortion. And that was something that we really had an opportunity, and it was before us. And we had the science, we had the statistics, we had the political platforms, and we didn't do the legal things we could have.
And why is that? Because the Christians are too comfortable, remote control this and microwave that and air condition this and that, and they don't get out and have this weird suggestion Jesus made, go out and make disciples of all nations. It's a suggestion. It's an idea. And the whole bit, we'll do it later. Let someone else do it. This is a problem. It's a huge problem. Now, so really quickly here, Andrew and I, we don't agree in a lot of stuff. He has the right to be wrong. And so we don't agree on I'm on-mill. I think he's pre-mill. I'm
biblical.
Yeah, we're biblical. It's okay, man.
Yeah, I'm numbered here.
And I'm a pedo-Baptist, but not for salvation. I'm a consistent covenantalist, and I believe that the first one's taken. Yeah.
Wait a minute. What?
We'll
Can you say it again? Can you say it again?
Yeah. I can. Trust me. I can ask some tough questions.
You said two words that don't mix.
Consistent covenantalist. Absolutely.
Yeah. You are wrong.
I could get in there and ask you guys. In fact, you guys want to have a good discussion, I'll ask you guys tough questions, okay? But the point is that, and this is what's really good. We all disagree on some things, but that's okay.
Well, the majority sure doesn't. You do.
Yeah, we're okay.
What's that?
Well, I said we're all doing fine. We all agree with each other.
Matt.
This is an odd man out.
And actually, I'll say this to what I think Matt's saying is, I've debated Matt Slick probably more than any other person that I know.
My wife.
I haven't debated.
Well, she lives with you. She's going to debate you all the time.
But your wife and I agree. We both think you're wrong all the time.
Well, yeah, but her opinion doesn't count, and yours is useless.
But the thing is that you and I have debated more topics. I mean, we've debated covenant theology versus dispensationalism, gifts of tongues,
Pre-mill, all-mill, post-mill.
baptism.
Rapture of the wicked first.
We've debated a lot of different things, and the thing though is that we on the core issues we agree.
Right.
There's a lot we disagree on. We know where that, and we don't shy away
And
from
who
that.
pays for dinner?
I do. I got 9 years of history on my side.
Unless I'm
The thing
there, then
is-
he says I'm not paying.
The thing is, we get along and we can work together. We have gone out preaching together, done open air together. We've done things together, and that's the point. And we have to have this cross-denominational essence of what the essentials are so that we can rise up as Christians and fight the real enemy, not each other. That's what has to happen. That's what has to happen.
I'm going to respond to Joanne. She said, "Is Justin pre-trib?" 100%.
We got to talk.
We already have, Matt. You keep forgetting this stuff.
So we'll continue. Here's the thing.
Back on subject.
I have an idea that I think, I've thought about, I've talked about it in the radio. What if we have 26 letters in the alphabet, 30 days in a month? What if, exclude Sundays, what if we, everybody, like say, next year, September 1st, whatever, everybody in America whose last name starts with the letter A was to get a sign. We have an organization, and you go to the capital or, of your state. But if you're too far away, then you go to a town hall, whatever, with signs, and everybody is there for a few hours. Everybody all across the United States on the same day. And the next day, people with the letter B go out there. And of course, you can mix, of course. And you do this for 3 weeks. And we have an organization, a national organization where you join and you pay money to get into, $5, $10 a month, so that you can bring lawsuits against people who are violating our rights. And we can defend the people who are unjustly arrested and accused, and we can start working for righteousness' sake. The enemy, because Jesus even said it, Matthew 12, 22 through 32, a house divided against itself will fall. And this is the thing. We Christians have got to be united. I've been suggesting this idea, other ideas, but the thing is, we Christians need to do something instead of talking about it. And if it comes down to self-defense of vaccines, if the vaccine is deadly, if the vaccine is deleterious, if it's whatever, we don't know. Yeah, well, actually, we're finding out more. Did you hear that what happened to Eric Clapton? After he took the vaccine, he lost the use of his hands for a few days.
Ooh, that's
And we're finding out, that these really nice groups called Facebook and Google and Twitter, these really objective groups.
They're Christians, man. What's wrong with you?
Oh yeah, they're wonderful people. They are censoring counter information. It's very difficult to find proper information, and I've been searching this for a long time. So all this stuff is real. We as Christians, if we're going to have the right of self-defense doesn't just mean someone comes into our home. Self-defense also means society is going liberal, saying pro-homosexual, pro-abortion, and we need to defend the truth of God, make a whip of cords, whatever that is equivalent to, drive the people out of the false churches and temples, however we do that, and defend the helpless and stand up in unity and do this. That's what we need to do.
Let me pose a question. So this Wednesday night teaching 1 Peter in our church's Bible study. And that's people can go to Striving for Eternity YouTube channel and see that. Going through 1 Peter chapter 2, 11 to 17, in there it talks about submitting to government. Romans 13 has been challenged, debated very much in the last year and a half. So here becomes the question, Matt, what if God wants to bring Marxism to the United States?
To punish Christian churches? Probably.
Well, okay, so here's the question then. Just like he brought Babylon in to judge the nation of Israel, and they had 70 years of captivity because of their disobedience, going against Babylon. And I think Jeremiah is the one who ends up telling them, submit to this. They're submitting to a tyrannical government that's going to put them into captivity.
Yep.
That is God's will. So if it's God's will, I'm hoping it is not. I'm praying, Lord, please be this not be your will. But if it's God's will for America to go Marxist and we were to fight against it, then aren't we fighting God's will?
There's what's called the decretive will, the prescriptive will, and the permissive will. And we could talk about that. But the thing is that we are to fight evil. We don't know what God's ultimate decrees are. And so our job is to resist evil all the way. And consistently and vehemently, as men, do this. You know, one of the things is we see these women going to these councils, where they talk about school councils, school meetings, and the women, they call them mama bears, and I like that, that's attractive. If one had an AK strapped on, I'm like, oh baby, but they're sitting there doing all this stuff, right? I don't see the men really doing it this much. Now they are, but I see a lot of women. Well, the men are the ones in the church who are obligated to stand up. When Adam and Eve were in the garden, she sinned first. The pre-incarnate Christ said to the man, where are you? He didn't say, Eve, what have you done? He came to the man. Our obligation as Christian men is to stand up against unrighteousness. And I could talk about the women's response into this, but that's the thing. We have to fight Marxism and socialism because they're ungodly. The biblical governmental system is capitalist, self-representation or representation of groups, of others, the right of self-defense, to do with the land as you want. That's right, Chris. I worry you.
That worries me sometimes.
That's right. I worry a lot of people. But
what amazes me is I hear all this, Matt. I love you to death. I hear all this stuff and I'm going, man, it sounds really good in an amillennial perspective. But from a biblical perspective, when I look at it, I say, okay, what's Christ doing in his timeline according to the scripture? And as I look at the scripture, it's amazing how these things fall in line with Christ returning for his bride, to take his bride. Now, the Bible doesn't say that we are going to have no problems and everything's going to be all hunky-dory and then, the Lord's going to come back, take his bride home, and then bad things happen. The Bible tells us that the bad stuff is going to be all over the place. It's going to be, everywhere. And it's clear that way if you just read the Bible consistently.
Yeah, if you do that, okay. And you go to Luke, you go to Matthew 13:41, where Jesus says he takes the wicked out of his kingdom, and he says in Matthew 13:30 the first one's taken before the Christians are the wicked. And you go to Matthew 27.
If you look at that section, you would actually find out that
I'm going to get us back on to track.
It's the wicked who are taken. The wicked are taken first. Allow them both to go together first. Take the tares.
I'm going to ask. Right. I want to ask you the same question. So, Dave, what do you?
My view means that we look and we do. We don't wait to escape.
We work until we get called home. This world's not our home.
Yeah, I know a lot of people go, "Why worry about it? We'll get raptured."
Okay, so Dave, let me ask you, in that same scenario, right? What do we do if it is God's will that to bring Marxism in, would fighting against it be right or wrong?
What kind of will?
Well, I'm asking David now. So when you get ramped up, he's kind of like one of those wind-up toys. Once you get him wound up, he can't.
No, I love it. I love listening to him. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to comment further.
It's just tough being right all the time.
You wouldn't know what it feels like.
An ideology such as Marxism, or even what we find in CRT, that you can take some of this back to Marxism and whatnot. There's no way that within the same sentence, if it be God's will that this happens, because God does. I don't see him bringing that kind of judgment or. It is so anti-God that God's children in the meantime are to resist that, speak against it, do everything we have at our means to challenge it, and to point out the evils that it is telling an ungodly message. And our response needs to be to counter that at all costs. Okay.
In the name of Christ, for
Yes.
the glory of God.
Yep.
We do this because it's right before God, not because we want to just be upset and stop somebody from doing something bad. It must be for the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ that we Christian men stand up in righteousness and be willing to face the consequences of physical, financial, social persecution that's going to come.
And that
Yeah.
will happen during a tribulation period, for instance, when
Oh, it's going to. That's why you guys are going to know about it.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing that I think is often missed when people talk about submit to government. When we discuss that and we look at the passage, such as in 1 Peter chapter 2,
right.
verse 13, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake.
For the Lord's sake.
Every human institution. I think this is the issue I find when it comes to submission to government. It's that first part that so many people miss. They read it as submit to human institutions.
Right.
And they're skipping the essential argument there for the Lord's sake. We submit to the Lord in what the Lord commands us to do. Now, if God gave us a word, as he did for Jeremiah, that there was a judgment coming and Babylon's going to come and do this, now we're in a different situation. We have God's will. We know what it is. It's clear. It's written. And therefore, going against that's going to be different than going against a Marxism today, which we don't know what the Lord's will is. We don't know if God is using Marxism to create a revival in the country. That could be his will. We don't know. So we have to fight evil, but we fight evil not because we're Americans and we have rights.
Right.
We fight evil because it is submitting unto God. We submit to the reason we submit to ruling authorities, to governments, is because it is an act of submission to God. And this is the thing I think is really missing, that I've seen missing in most of the discussions and debates on this, is that aspect that we submit to God first. And it's because we submit to God that we submit to government.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Unless the government becomes ungodly, then we're obligated to resist it. And if we don't resist it as Christians, then it becomes our God.
Yeah.
Yep. That was behind the American Revolution right there.
What was that?
That was the basis for the American Revolution.
Which was?
That government became ungodly under King George.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know that the Puritans are the ones who developed, at the request of the people. They went to the pastors here when they came over, in the 1600s, develop a godly biblical governmental system and representation and right of ownership of land, self-defense, and things like this. And there's more, witnesses and trials and stuff like that. They did that, and these things have been worked down into our country. And this is why we're strong, because of the principles that have been there. Well, aren't we Christians obligated to resist evil? Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. Well, then why is it that the Christians, we fight against it. There's different ways of fighting against it. But the Christian church as a whole is not doing it. The Christian church as a whole is weak and it's anemic. And the problem lies at the feet of the clergy, because they're the ones who have to teach. So this is where it needs to start, and it needs to change, and they need to start speaking from the pulpit about political issues. The idea of separation of church and state and all this idiocy, this crap, it's not biblical. Every area of life is under the lordship of Jesus Christ, politics included. I've even said in the radio, you can't vote for so-and-so or this person or that person. I'm not supposed to say that, but I do it anyway. If they affirm homosexuality and abortion, you can't vote for them, because they're ungodly, and we're not to support ungodliness. So I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat. I'm a constitutionalist. But yeah, and I believe the Constitution is a really good document. But anyway, Christians need to stand up. I believe that we're losing ground so fast that it's sliding down the hill, that it's going to take major work from the Christians. And just like you were saying, Andrew, maybe it is God's decreed of will, so to speak, that he is ordaining this discipline upon the country for the failure of the Christians. And I tell people there's two ways to discipline: internally, self-discipline, or externally, when God works upon you. And it's the latter that's occurring now because of the failures of the Christians. We need to repent here in our own hearts and our own minds first, and then move out.
Well, let me bring. You're going to say something, David?
Yeah, I was just going to mention I think we're at a huge statistical disadvantage, and I think we keep thinking that we're still a Christian nation. And
We're
300.
anti-Christian.
Yeah, we're 330 some million strong in this country, and the total number of probably born again Bible believing Christians in this country is between 7 and 9%, which puts us somewhere around 27 million. And since the 1960s, with the immigration and naturalization laws that we passed, we have become completely pluralistic. There's approximately 1,270 different religions in this country right now. We are, by definition, then a pagan nation, and which is a wonderful opportunity for gospel outreach. Okay, but when in other words, we have on a mass scale, we could be reaching a lot of people. So there's some real problems already right there.
Yeah.
So the idea of appealing back to the fathers of this nation, well, the majority of people in this country have no idea what you're talking about anymore. You know what I mean? And so, as Matt said, constitutionalists, most people have thrown out the Federalist Papers. They've never read them. So, they have no idea what
They don't know what they are.
They don't know what they are, nor the foundation of a Christian nation. So it's going to be we're wide open for any kind of an ideological takeover.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, the Blaze says that there's a warning now at some place. National Archives Records Administration determined recently that America's founding documents may be harmful or difficult for some users to view. So the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights have warning labels on. So why is this the case? Because the devil wants to destroy Christianity. He doesn't want the gospel preached.
And we're probably the most organized Christian nation in the world. Although Africa, they're in larger number, and even in China. But we have yet the resources, the Christian resources, and we're not utilizing them.
And that's one thing I'll say is that we have internally in the church, we have false teachers, we have false doctrine, we have false theology, we have all types of false things going on in the professing church. Not the actual church, but the professing church, and what you're saying, Matt, is right. What you're saying, Dave, is right. That is why I want to go ahead and plug that Shepherd's Theological Seminary. These guys are trying with all of the fibers in their being to push back against the tide of critical race theory, the liberalization and the socialized ideologies that is coming into the Southern Baptist Convention, to the false teaching that is going around, and they're trying to push back against that tide to say, look, we can have biblical, God glorifying men and women. And it's not just pastors that are going to be taught at STS, but the majority of pastors that are being taught there are being equipped to stand against that tide. And that's what we need to be doing. And that's where we need to be at. And I want to encourage everybody, go check it out. If you have any ideas of that, go look at Shepherd Seminary.
Yeah. So that's shepherds.edu is that. So let me bring Ron in. He's been backstage this whole time. Ron, for folks, is someone you've seen. Where he makes comments. He's usually here in the background. And so this is the first time coming in, and I know we had Pedro in earlier. He comes in and always has trouble connecting and then drops out. But Pedro, if you're still there, if you got a question, you can ask online. So Captain Black Eagle, AKA Ron, welcome. I know that you're a regular in our Christian apologetics group, but you had some questions that you wanted to bring up earlier. I know I told you we wanted to get some of this discussion out. So what were some of the questions that you had? Are you there? Oh, maybe he's not there.
He got raptured.
Yep.
No, because the rest of us didn't, Matt.
Yeah.
That's a good. When I can see YouTube, I know nobody else is around. All right. So,
Okay, we hear you now. There you
so
go.
here's the deal. First of all, I spent 20 years in the military,
Thank you for
and I've listened to everything you guys have said, and you are absolutely 100% correct. If it was not for the Christian worldview, the things that I would have done in the military would have me living in hell right now. The question I had for you, and this is a complicated question. I used to teach use of force, when you can use force, when you can't use force, and to what extreme you can use force. And here was the question that I always pose to my classes. You're sitting here in the room. Somebody comes in through the door and they have a pipe in their hand. They hold the pipe in the air and they say, I'm going to blow everybody up in this room. Can you shoot them? The normal answer was, I don't know. And I'm like, well, it's already too late to make a decision.
Yes.
And even if you shot them and they let go of that bomb and it still went off, you would still be in the same situation, but you have to make a choice. And it's an instantaneous choice. It's not something like, well, let me talk with my friends to say what they think. You've got to do it right away. Is that wrong to pose that question?
Shoot the bomb.
Is it wrong to pose the question, or?
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, you should never pose a question like that ever again.
Yes.
You know what? Can I ask
a question?
Is that? Can I ask a question? When you use that illustration, was the pipe he was holding? Was it? Did you describe it as an active bomb?
Yeah.
No, and I didn't do it because you'll never know if it's an active bomb or
Okay.
until it goes off.
Because that's what I was. My answer was going to involve just that. My answer would be that I first have to believe. I mean, if it's a pipe where I can see both ends are open, then I'm not believing it's a pipe bomb. I have to believe it's a real bomb.
Right.
So if I believe, so my answer would kind of be complicated in the sense that I don't think it's as simple as a yes or no, because I don't have enough information in the hypothetical to answer. So the first thing I'm going to have to decide is it a genuine threat that I think that more than just myself are going to be harmed by whatever he has? I know the liberals will say you shoot him in the hand, because that way he doesn't know. For folks to understand, trying to shoot someone in the hand or in the leg in a split second is very, very difficult to do. There's a greater chance you'll miss and harm someone else in a crowded room. You go for the largest mass of body, which is the center part of the body, which is why you would shoot there. So I would shoot there. So I guess Chris Onholz is saying shoot the bomb. Matt, you gotta talk. But
I think the closest illustration is what we learned, like in the military, for instance, that I would not knowing if this is C4 or whatever you're dealing with. Remember, and we even awarded men medals for this, most often posthumously. Consider it in the area of like that's a grenade. So what do you do?
Exactly.
Somebody sacrifices their life for the sake of the others. And
that's where I was going to go with the question, with the answer, from a Christian perspective and a law enforcement perspective here. My duty is to defend life, to defend and protect them. It's almost the same realm when you're dealing with firearms and you're having to shoot somebody or not. You have a group of people come in and they're shooting up whatever area, which happens. How are you justified in taking their lives? The question's asked constantly because Christians want to know.
Yeah.
I look at it from this perspective. I'm not doing this to take a life. I'm doing this to stop the taking of life and for the gospel's sake. I'm doing it. You're exactly right. For the gospel's sake. And here's why I say that. If I can stop the bad guy, the guy's got the pipe bomb, and if I can get to that pipe bomb and cover myself with it, I know where I'm going, guys.
Right.
I have no doubt that I'm going to heaven. Christ saved my soul. I was a wicked, vile sinner. God saved me. I wasn't looking. He found me. He saved my wicked soul. I am now obligated to be the man that's going to stand on that pipe bomb, like Dave just said. This is a grenade. No matter what condition it is, I'm jumping on it. The bad guys come in the door. I'm going to stop them if I can, not to take their life, I want to clarify this. This is not to take a life. This is so that all the other pagans in the community can see that I have died to the glory of God to serve Christ for the gospel. And Andrew can come along and say, you know why he just did that? Because of Jesus Christ. And you need to know Christ as your Savior. But you were given another moment. That's why.
For folks listening, let me just emphasize what you and David, why the distinction made there is, if you have a grenade or a pipe bomb, okay, shooting a person here's the question that ends up having to be asked. And I think this is where Ron's probably getting to. Does that stop the destruction? No. In fact, shooting them, depending what it is, if it's a grenade and they already pulled the pin, shooting them guarantees that it's probably going to go off.
It enhances it. Yeah.
A pressurized trigger. Yeah.
So the thing is, it's not always as simple as just one or the other, because there's a lot of things that you have to take into. And for folks that are listening to this is what we're hoping you will get through with something like this. We've said this throughout the show. You've heard it by Dave. You heard it by Matt. These are not simple things. These are complex things. It's not always a simple answer. And there's a lot to be looked at with this. And therefore, one of the things that really bothers me lately with Christians online is the attitude of, if you don't agree with me, you just support evil. Yeah. There's a lot of complexity in these issues, and you need to take the time to understand why someone comes to the conclusion that they come to. Do not just say that, well, if you don't agree with my conclusion, well, maybe they didn't think of the things you thought about, or maybe you didn't think of the things they thought about. Let me just tell you, Matt wrote this article on Carm, and I think Matt, I'm just going from memory, but I would say half dozen to a dozen people that were on the review list that were going through giving comments.
Yeah,
so Matt,
you and I talked about it.
Yeah. And so Matt doesn't just write these articles and puts them out. There's a bunch of us that get in on this, and he bounces ideas off things, then he writes things and then there's people who say, hey, can you review this? Can you check this? Why? Because all of us have a different perspective on things. We need to look at that and not just accuse people of being wrong right out the bat.
Yeah.
So just kind of my soapbox, but Ron, let me go. I didn't know if you had more questions.
That was actually the whole reason we asked the question. It wasn't, are you right or wrong? It's what would you do? And that's what you guys need to talk about, is what will you do if that ever happened? It's like when you shoot somebody, why are you shooting them center mass? Because if you shoot them in the hand, you can still kill them.
Yeah.
The shooting of someone, at least from a military perspective, was always what got you in trouble. If you shoot at someone with no reason, then you're going to go to jail. If you shoot at somebody for a reason, but then you shot, well, for instance, at their arm and you miss, and you kill kids in a schoolyard, you're going to go to jail. It's not an easy question, and most of it isn't. War is not an easy question, but I do appreciate the answers you guys have given. It's perfect.
Thank you.
You have any other questions or for us tonight?
Oh, there's so many for Dave. I mean, we're talking, theory of war. I look back at Jonathan, when Jonathan is standing on a hill, coming down that hill, killing Philistines left and right. His father Saul is hanging out in a bunker, trying to figure out what's going on. Jonathan has confused the enemy so crazily that they're killing each other. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to confuse the Satan worshipers and the heretics out there.
They're already in power. They're called Democrats. They're very confused.
Oh no, the Republicans.
I agree with that.
Too, so.
We got too many Republicans jumping in the same boat.
That's true.
But if that's what it's about confusing the enemy, getting them going after each other, not us going after each other. That's all I got.
That's right.
You guys did great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Dave, did you want to comment on that at all?
No.
Okay. So let me just piggyback off, Ron, what you said. Matt, if anyone hasn't figured out, Matt is crazy. But let me give one example of his craziness. He decided not to go to Dallas, Texas to debate one atheist, but two atheists, two separate nights on two separate topics. So they only had to prepare one debate. He had to prepare two. Not a smart thing. He handled both of them brilliantly and won both. especially when his the guy he's debating the second night, like, actually it was like, let's not do a cross-examination.
That was awesome.
Yeah, that's how you know someone lost. Then he goes on his own show for 2 hours saying how he won. No, you lost.
But he got upset. He did several videos, I found out.
Oh, yeah.
I want to get down there to Austin. I want to get a church down there, have him come down. I want to do a thing on atheism and have some debate discussions with atheists. So anyway,
Hey, Matt, let me ask you a question, if I may.
sure.
This is about you, and this is the first time we've had it's a good one to meet. Are all of your articles and things you've written, or at least recent, are they on carm.org?
The site's almost 26 years old. I've written probably 5, 6, I don't know, thousands of articles, and I have a few other thousands I haven't even released yet. We also have other helpers and stuff like that. But yeah.
And then good search engine to find them.
Yeah. And I get a little obsessive. I wrote 182 articles on annihilationism.
A little excessive, just a little.
And so when I study something, I just dive in, and believe it or not, I'll just say this: people know I have Asperger's, and so there's advantages, disadvantages. One of the advantages is I can remember patterns, numbers, and I can be really obstreperous.
No.
I can confirm that.
I'm anxious to read it because I've written in the area of annihilationism. I'll look that up. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I got good arguments against it, and calling out some people by name who are teaching some damnable heresy inside of annihilationism, physicalism, and stuff. Another topic.
Here's the thing, Matt. When you did that, we did those debates down there in Dallas. You and I went down there. I don't know if you remember this, but there was and I don't even remember. There was an atheist that was online. Something had happened that within Christianity, we'd say that disqualifies them from, from being in what we call ministry, right?
Right.
And it was interesting because when we were there, we had a lot of professing atheists there, and
we went out to dinner.
Oh yeah, but
the guy had the same birthday as me. I remember that. It was weird.
But there was I was asking many of them about that individual who, basically had an affair and different things, and it was interesting because the overwhelming response was they would ignore it. They would, if they recognized it as wrong, they would justify why he still should have a platform and things like that. And there was one guy, and I think you'll remember this. We spent a lot of time with him. Cowboy hat. I'm not going to give the name. He used to be a regular on the show, but he actually said, when I asked him, he said, "Look, Andrew, I like you guys. I like you. I like Matt. But here's the thing. He's doing a great job for our side. And it's not about what he does in his personal life. It's about beating Christians." And I remember after that, we went to dinner and we were talking about that. And we realized this guy understands what Christians should be doing, is that we should be recognizing who the enemy is, and it's not each other.
Right.
It's not, let's have all our squabbles on Facebook and public so everyone could see. They're actually unified in the idea of attacking an enemy.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons I think so many Christians don't realize, like, why are we losing these things? Because they're very clear on what their goal is, to put an end to Christianity.
Yeah.
We're not so clear in spreading the gospel. And by the way, notice the difference there. Our objective is not to put an end to atheism in the sense that we got to wipe them out. It's to spread the gospel so that they know the truth. There's a big difference between those two. And so I think that's the thing that with this particular topic, Romans 13, submission to government, man, I have seen more division on this subject that, online and elsewhere, that is quite disappointing.
Because people want to be able to have something to give them an excuse to not be responsible. Submit to the government. Don't think, don't do, don't worry, just submit. That means I can go about my business. I don't have to worry about anything. But true Christianity is not easy Christianity. Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow after me on a daily basis. He says, if you don't do this, you're not worthy of me. Go out into the world, make disciples of all nations. I personally don't understand how any Christians, real Christians, can sit around and do nothing when people are going to hell. Now, I'm not saying every mom who's pregnant and got three kids on the floor, has to go out and do evangelism. Of course not. But we have certain callings and certain abilities and certain things that within our context that God has given us and equipped us to do. And another thing is that we need to be ready to make mistakes. Too many Christians are afraid to mess up. Andrew, you and I have preached. We went out to that place in New York,
Union Square.
And I remember that. And no one speaks perfectly. And I remember I don't know if I messed up or not, but you know what? I don't care. I get up, I'm going to talk, and I'm going to do the best I can. And we have to not be afraid to take chances and take risks. When I was on the Daily Show, it didn't work out so well because what they did. But in other areas, it does work. We have got to be, as Christians, take chances and go forward. That's why I like to hear stories of failures as well as successes, because failures are also successes, because we're doing something. I believe we need to trust God and go forward, and that we can, because we have that banner. We have the Lord Jesus Christ. We have the power of that gospel, and he wants us to do that. And if we're in his will and we're preaching that gospel and doing what he desires, then he's going to open up the right doors at the right time, the right way. It's his job, not ours, to open up those doors. Ours is just to go through them.
To be obedient.
One of the things that has been refreshing for me right now, I'm teaching a course, an advanced course on patristic theology, and just camping in the first 5 centuries. And many of the students have not had anything like that in history or theology. And the thing that, as you read the epistles, the number one theme, James was writing to Christians in his epistle on how we now live an early Christian church. But Peter writes what it is to be a Christian living in an alien culture. And you'll start to see that. As you start to read the apostolic fathers, they're the first generation after the apostles, and they cover the first and second generation. So you got letters like First Clement, Second Clement. They're not at all inspired, and you can see the drop off right away in spirituality from them. But the thing that you notice is they would write, and some of them are very weary and tiresome to read through, but the theme that they were trying to deal in the first 50 years, and then in the next 100 years, and then in the next, as we went through the apologists, and then we went through we come with the apostolic fathers, then the apologists, and then the polemicists, and then we get to the theologians. That what they're dealing with is Christians became comfortable in the cultures they were living in. This has been the plague of Christianity, yes, the acquiescence to culture for 20 centuries. Okay.
Amen.
And that we're today in the world in which we live, the modern world, we as you mentioned, Andrew, and Matt's been talking about, just brought up, and that is, we look at America and we expect our government, and we expect it to give us. For Christians, we've joined the culture. We are owed this. This is my rights. It comes down. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, one of the things though, also, and I remember you teaching this in one of either Church History 1 or 2, I forget which one. But I'm going to show how much I actually paid attention and remember it. But you always talked about these periods of a pendulum swing, where there's always the pendulum. It swings out one way, and people go to the and then it swings back. Yep. And how we're always seeing that in church history, in the theology. And my prayer is that maybe with everything going on, and I actually think that Joe Biden has done more than Donald Trump ever could in waking up conservative Christians to say, oh, like all of the things I was taking for granted are being taken away. Like it's time for me to actually take my faith serious and do something about what I say I believe.
Hey, and you know what? It's only taken 8 months.
Yeah.
I mean,
I imagine what it's going to be like in 3 years.
Yeah. Look how far we have slid away in 8 months, which means if you want to use the Old Testament term, sleeping, on the wall. And,
Yeah.
and we have a very, very complacent, lethargic Christianity right now. And I think we're on the verge of people becoming very serious in the pew, because they're now experiencing it at work. And and let's go back to the COVID vaccination for a moment. For the first time, for many of them, it's like, wait a minute, I have to think, what do I really even believe in something now that is striking my family and me? Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not their Christianity being shaken yet. This is this is just starting to experiment for many of them.
Well, years ago, I won't give all the details, and it wasn't bad or good, just how life is. I had to make a decision, and the decision to be as godly and forthright according to my character, my heart before God, I knew it was going to cost me a great deal. It was the loss of a ministry over it. And I stuck with what I thought was right before God. And I'm going to tell you, it cost a great deal.
Yeah.
And it did. And it took years, actually decades, for my wife and I to financially recover from stuff. But God somehow provided through all of it. A lot of times Christians think, these morons on TV with the perfect hair, perfect teeth, and all this stuff, God wants you healthy, wealthy, and all this idiocy. They think this is what we deserve because Jesus is the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian surfer dude dressed in a woman's nightgown. And so this is who they think Christ is. And that's just not the way it is. When you live for Jesus, there's going to be persecution. God has granted that we're going to suffer. Philippians 1:29. Not that we want to, but it's going to happen, and we need to be willing to move forward. And it's a reward. It's a blessing. It's a blessing. And I've been through it. It's a blessing. It is.
Yeah, we're alien, strangers, pilgrims walking. We are light in a dark world. And we are being opposed, and persecution, right. And why that surprises people now, and it's they're shocked, and it's like this is what God said you need to expect. Christ told us this was coming, and they hated me; they're going to hate you.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out is as we're talking.
I'm going to let you finish up, and then we're going to close out the show. We are at the 2-hour mark. I like to end on time. I know our audience hates that, and they like us to go longer, but we did promise Dave we'd go 2 hours, and want to cut him loose and let him be able to get to his family. But so why don't you finish, and then I'll wrap up the show.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to point out is that we're talking about just war. We're talking about self-defense and whatnot. The ultimate self-defense is the gospel of Jesus Christ, because every single one of us are going to stand before a holy God. And I don't care what you do, you're not going to make it out of this world alive. It doesn't matter what we do, we're not going to make it out of this world alive. And so when we're having these debates, it's among Christians, a family-friendly debate, the discussion, to seek to understand how we should live and act. And as all of us have said here, the most important priority is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So if you don't know Christ as your Savior and Lord, if you die right now, what's going to happen to you? I'll tell you, you're going to stand before a holy God. You're going to stand before a holy God in judgment under the wrath and condemnation that you deserve, because all liars will have their part in the lake of fire. No thief or blasphemer in the kingdom of heaven. And you and I, every one of us, we've violated and offended a holy God. It doesn't matter how good you are or how bad you are. It doesn't matter if you're Taliban or if you're Joe Biden. It doesn't matter if you're anyone in anything in between. When you stand before a holy God, what's it going to be like for you? You need Christ as your Savior, because he's the only one that can tell you why we have a just war theory. He's the only one that can consistently tell you what it means to be holy and right in the sight of God. And he's the only one that can make you right through the gospel, through his sacrificial sacrifice on the cross for you. Now, if you know Christ as your Savior, what should you be doing now? Should you be preaching against the government and everything else? To a point, yes. But your main sermon had better be, everyone needs to know Christ. Everyone needs Christ. It doesn't matter who you are. That's where our churches have failed. We need to pick up that cross and follow it today.
And this was a thing, Justin, that you and I tried to bring up several times when we've dealt with some of these issues with folks, is the fact that the gospel is the issue. We submit to God first and then government. And if we don't get that order right, we're going to be woefully wrong in the application, because what's going to be is we're going to let our pride make the decisions, what we want to be right. And we need to submit to God first. Now, I know that for some folks, we've just kind of opened the can of worms, right? We've just kind of peeled back a little bit of the onion. This is the thing with this. This is not easy to work through. Justin, you just heard what class you should be taking there at the seminary.
That's next semester.
Yeah, so you better sign up for that. But seriously, there's so much involved in this. Even with Ron's question that he asked, it's asking a question because there's not a clear answer. There's a lot of questions you need to get answered first before you can answer something. So the challenge with this as a way of application when it comes to apologetics, you need to think through the issues. You can't just come to quick conclusions because you feel it's right, or you read one scripture verse and that answers everything.
Yes.
One scripture is enough as long as it's within context. However, the issue is that applied properly to the situation you're in? There's a lot more that we usually have to take into account when we look at these things. A lot of people are taking knee-jerk reactions on what to do. And what bothers me the most, I go back to what was occurring back with Jim Coates up in there in Canada, and people were saying that he was wrong. Saying that there were those that agreed with the way Arthur Pawlowski was handling things. There were people that agreed with the way Jim Coates handled them. Two very different ways of handling it. But the question is, and this, you go back to 1 Peter 2:11-17. What's he doing? He's talking about our holiness, our testimony, submitting to government. There's more to submission to government than just whether we submit or not. We answer to a higher calling as Christians. We have to be good ambassadors for Jesus Christ. And so when we do things, we are to do it to represent Christ well. In fact, to the point where Peter says there, I think it's verse 15. Verse 15. For such is the will of God, that by doing right, you may silence the ignorance of foolish men.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's the thing. It's not about us promoting our rights. It is about us promoting Jesus Christ and letting him shine, even maybe in a dark time. That's a hard message, and I understand that. But may it be an encouragement to you to know that many, many, many believers have gone that same path before us and have done right and silenced the mouth of the ignorant.
Amen.
And so when we're answering these things, or maybe we need to say, are we submitting to God in this? What's our purpose in our view, whether to submit to government or not, or the specific issues, and ask the question: are we going to be in our behavior getting people to say, "Oh, look, that's just a prideful Christian," or are we going to get them saying, "You know what? I got nothing to say. Look at how they're behaving." So it's something for us to think about until next week. Next week, Justin, I'm trying to look at what we got on the schedule here for next week. I believe we have next week that's right. Next week we have Justin Peters coming in. We're going to be doing a response to Sam Storm's article. Sam Storms did an article basically saying that you should or could sing Bethel music and Hillsong in your churches. As folks here know, Justin has been against that, and we're going to let Justin give a response to that, and we may pick up some other topics that we may discuss. But I hope you come back next week for that. Remember to strive to make today an eternal day for the glory of God, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.